Risk assessment training. What is risk assessment? Risk assessment is a systematic approach to identify hazards, evaluate risk, and incorporate appropriate measures to manage and mitigate risk for any work process or activity. Why we need to do risk assessment. Protect ourselves. I is key to prevention of accident. Everyone deserve to go home safely at the end of the day. Elevate safety awareness and ownership, aware of hazards, risks, and controls, and practicing safe science. University and faculty procedures, compliance with regulations. Definition of hazard: source or situation or act with a potential for harm in terms of human injury or ill health or a combination of these. For example, toxic or flammable substances, electric energy, working at heights, etc. Definition: hazard. Hazard is something that causes harm or injury. Definition: risk. Combination of the likelihood of an occurrence of a hazardous event or exposures, and the severity of injury or ill health that may be caused by the event or exposures, likelihood that a hazard will cause a specific harm or injury to person or damage property. Risk means the chance that someone will be harmed by the hazard. Risk equals hazard effect into probability, likelihood of occurrence. Risk concepts. What can go wrong? How likely is it? What are the impacts? Risk level. Manage risk. Risk management also includes control and monitoring of risks, as well as communicating these risks. Legal requirement. Workplace Safety and Health Act effective from the 1st of March 2006. The WSH Act is an essential part of the new OSH framework to cultivate good safety habits in all individuals at the workplace. It requires every person at the workplace to take reasonable practicable steps to ensure the safety and health of every workplace and worker. Reasonable practicable. Action is considered to be practicable when it is capable of being done. Reasonable usually takes into account the severity of harm and degree of risk or likelihood of that injury or harm occurring. Greater risk, reasonable, to go to very considerable expense and effort to reduce it. How much is known about the hazard and the ways of eliminating, reducing or controlling it. What are others practicing? And what the standards recommend. Workplace Safety and Health Risk Management Regulations 2006. Enforced from the 1st of September 2006. The WSH Risk Management Regulations require employers, the self-employed, and principal, including contractor and subcontractor, to conduct risk assessments for the purpose of identifying workplace safety and health risks, and implementing measures to control the hazards and reducing the risks. Whoever generates the risk shall manage the risk. Risk management regulations. Why is there a need for risk management regulations? To hold stakeholders accountable for managing the risks they create. To reduce risk at source. What is a hazard? Means anything with the potential to cause bodily injury. What is a risk? Means the likelihood that a hazard will cause a specific bodily injury. to any person. Risk control. What can be done to control risks in the workplace? Some measures are, from most to least preferred, elimination, eliminate the hazard from the workplace. Substitution, substituting a hazardous substance or process with a less hazardous one. Engineering controls, installing machine guarding or enclosing a noisy machine. Administrative controls, applying a permit to work system or lockout, and tag-out procedures. PPE, provision and use of these equipment, and SWP, safe work procedures. Records of risk assessment. How often must the risk assessment be reviewed? At least once every years, after an accident, when there is significant change in work processes, introduction of new machinery or chemicals, information on safety technology or requirement made known. Risk assessment. Risk assessment process. Identify the hazards. Assess the risks and available control measures. Manage the risk. Control the risks through implementation of appropriate control measures. Monitor the controls to evaluate their effectiveness. Communication of risks and controls. Risk assessment flowchart. Identify. 1. Selecting experiments. 2. Break down into successive tasks. 3. Potential hazards. 4. Potential harm, ill health condition, assess. 5. Existing control measures. 6. Evaluate risk, severity, probability, manage risk. 7. Hazard control. 8. Additional control measures, responsible person, timeline, review, approval, communicate. Record keeping and document control. Identify potential hazards. The most important step in any risk assessment. Hazards can only be controlled if they are identified. Equipment. Procedures. Agents. Each step is analyzed for potential inherent hazards. Decision on the relevance of any particular hazard come later in the risk assessment processes. What are the hazards in a laboratory? Chemicals. Radiation. Fire. Electrical. Biological. Physical. Slips and trips. Falling hazard. Ergonomics. Thermal. Noise, etc. Identify potential harm. Identify what are the adverse conditions may arise due to the hazard present in your experiments, laboratory, or environment. Identify source of harm. Hazardous event or process. Hazardous substance. Equipment. Identify who could be harmed. Researcher. Other students. Contractor and supplier. Visitor. Identify how harm could occur. Accidental fall from height. Contact with corrosive chemicals. Injury. First aid treatment. Visit clinic and hospital. Admitted in hospital. Permanent damage. Acute vs chronic effects. Lab-acquired infection. Property damage. Breakage of glassware. Equipment. Furniture. Building. Environmental release. Release to air. Water. Waste materials, solid. Risk evaluation. Consider existing controls. Engineering controls, fume hood, glove box, chains for cylinder, others, administrative controls, signage, training, SOPs, others, personal protective equipment. Existing control will not change the severity but only likelihood. Severity and likelihood is based on 3x3 matrix and the respective criteria specified. Risk rating is the product of severity by likelihood. Refer to acceptability criteria on the recommended action for different risk rating. For medium and high risk, additional controls will be required. Severity categories and description. Risk matrix to determine risk level. Acceptability of risk. Control measures. Risk control. Using hierarchy of controls to reduce the risk. Using the concept of as low as reasonably practicable, ALARP. Hierarchy of risk control measures. Additional controls responsible person, and timeline, additional control for risk rated more than 3 or medium, and high risk. Reduce risk to as low as reasonably practicable. Who and when. Responsible person, to implement the identified control measures, and timeline for completion. Update the risk assessment upon completion of the additional control measures. Record keeping. Risk assessment record has to be kept for at least 3 years under the WHS/RM regulations requirement. Recommended to keep record as long as the process and activity is still valid, before end of any product life cycle or to tie in with the period other legislation requires pertaining to the particular process and activity. Implementation and review. 1. Management staff or principal investigator will need to approve the implementation of control measures. 2. Monitoring of the process or activity has to be carried to ensure that there is no residual risk or additional risk arising from the control measures. 3. Risk assessors have to check or monitor the new implementation of control measures, and to communicate with respective lab or operational personnel. 4. Review on risk assessment to be carried on the following basis, at least once every 3 years based on legislative requirements, after an accident, an incident occurrence, any change in process or activity. Thank you.